3 black SUVs pulled into my motel parking lot at 6:40 in the morning, and 4 men in dark suits stepped out before the engines even stopped running. The tallest one, broad-shouldered with a military haircut and credentials I'd never seen before in my life, walked up to my front desk and set down a photograph of the old man who was, at that very moment, asleep on my lobby couch under a wool blanket my late wife had crocheted. "Ma'am," he said, "we need to know if you've seen this individual. It's a matter of national security." I looked at the photograph. Then I looked through the glass partition at the man sleeping 15 feet away. The man I'd made Campbell's chicken noodle soup for the night before, whose trembling hands could barely hold the mug I gave him, who had told me his name was Walter and that he just needed somewhere warm. I set the photograph back on the counter. "Before I answer that," I said, "I need to understand what kind of trouble he's in." The agent stared at me. I stared back. "But to understand how we got here, you have to go back to about 14 months before that morning, to the summer I almost lost the motel entirely. My name is Darlene Kettner. I'm 31 years old and I've run the Pinecone Lodge just outside Harlan, Kentucky since 1997. 26 rooms, a small lobby with a stone fireplace, and a neon sign out front that's been missing the E in Lodge since a thunderstorm in 2011. My husband Roy and I bought it with every dollar we'd saved from his pension and my nursing salary. When Roy passed in 2016 from pancreatic cancer, I kept the place running because that's what you do. You don't stop. You just adjust the weight on your shoulders and keep walking. The motel was never fancy. We weren't competing with the Holiday Inn over in Middlesbrough. Our guests were long-haul truckers, families visiting relatives at the federal prison camp, the occasional hiker who'd wandered too far off the trail. I charged $54 a night, $62 for the rooms with a kitchenette. I did my own laundry, fixed my own pipes when I could, and hired local kids in the summer to help with the grounds. By the fall of the previous year, things had gotten thin. A section of the roof needed replacing. $7,000 I didn't have. The county had raised property taxes. Bookings were down because a new bypass had rerouted traffic 12 miles west. My daughter Carla, who lived in Lexington with her husband Todd, kept calling me with the same suggestion, delivered in that careful voice she used when she thought she was being diplomatic. "Mom, maybe it's time to sell." She said it the way you'd suggest putting down a family dog. Final. Like the decision had already been made and I just hadn't caught up yet. Todd was worse. Todd sold commercial real estate and he had a way of talking to me like I was a client who didn't understand the market. "The land alone is worth more than the business, Darlene. You're sitting on equity and burning it." He always called me Darlene. Never Mom. Never even Miss Kettner. Just Darlene, like we were colleagues who didn't particularly like each other. I told them both no. Politely. Firmly. The way I told 100 patients no when they wanted to pull their own IVs out. What I didn't tell them was that I'd taken out a small business loan the previous spring. $32,000 at 6.9% interest from a regional bank in London, Kentucky. I used it to fix the roof, replace the water heaters in Building 2 and repave the parking lot. It was a gamble, but it was my gamble to make. Then in late October the old man showed up. It was a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesdays were my slowest nights and I'd been watching Jeopardy in the back office with a bowl of butter pecan ice cream when I heard the lobby door chime. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees that evening, unusual for October even in the mountains. The wind was doing that thing it does in the hollows, moaning low through the trees like something grieving. He was standing just inside the door wearing a canvas jacket that was at least 2 sizes too big, khaki pants with mud on the cuffs, and shoes that had walked a lot of miles. No luggage. No car that I could see. His hands were shaking. Not the kind of shaking you get from cold, but the deep, neurological tremor I recognized from my years in nursing. Parkinson's maybe. Or essential tremor. He looked at me with pale blue eyes that were sharp and clear despite everything else about him suggesting he was falling apart. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I don't have money for a room. But if you'd let me sit in a chair somewhere warm for a few hours, I'll be gone by morning." Now, I'd had drifters come through before. It's part of running a motel on a rural highway. Most of them I'd turn away gently with directions to the shelter in Harlan. But something about this man stopped me. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. He held himself the way Roy used to, straight-backed even when exhausted, chin level, eyes direct. He had the posture of a man who'd spent decades in uniform. "When's the last time you ate?" I asked. He thought about it. Actually thought about it like he was trying to be precise. Yesterday morning. A gas station in Corbin had day-old biscuits for $1. I heated up soup. I brought him a blanket. I told him he could sleep on the lobby couch, which was a big L-shaped sectional Roy and I had bought from a furniture liquidator in Knoxville. It wasn't glamorous, but it was comfortable and it was warm and it was near the fireplace. He told me his name was Walter. He didn't offer a last name and I didn't ask for one. Over the next 3 days Walter stayed. He didn't ask to, I offered. And he repaid me by doing things around the motel I hadn't asked for. He fixed the hinge on the storage closet door that had been sticking for 2 years. He rewired a faulty outlet in room 14 with a precision that made my electrician look careless. He raked the entire parking lot clear of leaves in under an hour. He didn't talk much about himself. But in small pieces, over coffee in the early mornings before any guests were up, fragments came out. He'd been an engineer. He'd worked for the government. He'd had a wife named Helen who died in 2019. He had a son who didn't speak to him anymore. He'd been traveling for a while, which I understood was his dignified way of saying he'd been homeless. On the 4th night I gave him room 9. It was my least booked room, tucked in the back corner of Building 1, with a view of nothing but pine trees and a creek. I told him he could stay as long as he needed. I can't pay you, he said. I didn't ask you to, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, the way men of his generation accept kindness, with gravity like it's a contract they intend to honor. That was when Carla found out. Todd had driven down unannounced on a Saturday, supposedly to check on the property. What he was really doing was taking photographs for a real estate listing he wanted to pitch me on. I know this because I later found the listing draft saved on a tablet he left in my lobby. He'd already contacted a developer in Knoxville. He'd already gotten a preliminary appraisal. He'd valued the land at $410,000 and the business at essentially zero. But on that Saturday, what Todd saw was Walter sitting on the porch of room 9, reading a library book I'd picked up for him in town. "Who is that?" Todd asked me, not even lowering his voice. "A guest," I said. "Is he paying?" "That's between me and him." Todd's face did that thing it always did. The tight smile, the slight head shake, the exhale through the nose. "Darlene, you're running a charity out of a failing business. This is exactly what I'm talking about." There was the phrase. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." He'd said it when I replaced the sign instead of selling. He'd said it when I turned down the developer's first offer. And now he was saying it about a trembling old man reading a paperback on a porch. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Like my compassion was evidence of my incompetence. 3 days later, Carla called. She was upset, but in that controlled way that told me Todd had coached her. "Mom, Todd says you have a homeless man living in one of your rooms for free. He says the place is falling apart and you're making irrational decisions. He wants to talk to your bank." "Pie bank?" I said. "About the loan. He thinks if they knew the full picture, they might encourage you to reconsider." I sat in my office chair and looked at the wall where Roy's photo hung. Roy in his army dress greens, 23 years old, serious as a sermon. "Carla," I said quietly, "if Todd contacts my bank, my lawyer, or anyone connected to my business without my written consent, I will consider it interference and I will respond accordingly." There was a long pause. "Mom, we're trying to help." "Then help by trusting me." She hung up. I sat there for a while. The creek behind Building 1 was running high from the rain and I could hear it through the window. Sounded like static. Like the world was trying to tune into a frequency I couldn't quite catch. 2 weeks later I woke up to those black SUVs. The agent's name was Colton Reed. He showed me credentials from the Department of Defense, and a second man showed identification from something called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA. I'd heard of it vaguely, the way you hear about things in news stories that feel like they belong to a different planet than rural Kentucky. They told me Walter's full name was Dr. Walter Langford Prosser. He was 78 years old. He held a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT and had spent 31 years as a senior research scientist for the United States government, working on projects so classified that even his security clearance level was classified. He had retired in 2018. His wife had died the following year. His son, an attorney in Arlington, had sought conservatorship over him in 2021, citing cognitive decline, a claim Walter's own medical records did not support. but which a judge had briefly entertained before Walter disappeared. He hadn't been homeless in the way I'd assumed. He'd been running. From a system that wanted to control him, from a son who wanted access to his pension and benefits, and from a government that had recently discovered that certain documents Walter had been entrusted with decades ago had never been formally returned. "We're not here to arrest him," Agent Reed said carefully. "We're here to make sure those documents are accounted for and that Dr. Prosser is safe." "He is safe," I said. "He's in room 9. Reed studied me. "You took him in? Without knowing any of this?" "He was cold and hungry. That was enough to know." Reed paused. Then something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like respect. "Ma'am, we'd like to speak with him. But given his age and his medical condition, we'd prefer to do it gently. Would you be willing to be present?" I would. What happened next unfolded over the course of several hours. Walter was calm. He was coherent. He was, in fact, sharper than most people half his age. He explained to the agents, with the patience of a man who had spent his life explaining complex things to impatient people, that the documents in question had been digitized and returned to a facility in Maryland in 2017. He provided file numbers from memory. He provided the name of the receiving officer. He provided the date, the time, and the color of the envelope. Agent Reed made a phone call. Then another. Then a third. On the third call, I watched his face change. He hung up and looked at Walter. "Dr. Prosser, the records confirm exactly what you've described. The documents were received and archived. There was a cataloging error on our end. We owe you an apology." Walter nodded. "I've had worse misunderstandings," he said. Then came the part one wasn't expecting. Reed asked Walter about his living situation, about his son, about the conservatorship attempt. Walter told them everything in that same measured, factual tone. When he was finished, Reed made another call. This one to someone at the VA and then to a legal office I didn't catch the name of. By that afternoon, 2 things had happened. First, the conservatorship case his son had attempted to revive was flagged for review, with a note from a Department of Defense liaison indicating that Dr. Prosser had demonstrated no cognitive impairment during a formal interview. Second, Walter was informed that he was entitled to benefits he hadn't been collecting: a pension adjustment, VA healthcare, and back pay totaling somewhere north of $40,000, all of which had been rerouted to an account his son had set up during the brief conservatorship window. Todd called that evening. Not my Todd. Walter's son, also named Todd, which felt like the kind of coincidence even fiction would reject. But life doesn't care about plausibility. Walter took the call on the lobby phone. I could hear the son's voice, tight and defensive. "Dad, I was trying to protect you." Walter listened. Then he said quietly, "You were trying to protect my assets, Todd. There's a difference." The line was silent for a long time. "We can talk," Walter finally said. "But not yet." He hung up. He looked at me. And then he did something I'd only seen Roy do. He straightened his shoulders, took a breath, and let the weight of it pass through him instead of settling on him. My friend Bev Combs, who ran the diner in town and had been my closest friend since Roy's funeral, came by the next morning with a casserole and an opinion. "So you're telling me," she said, pouring coffee in my kitchen like she owned the place, "that you took in a stranger, fed him soup, gave him a room, and it turns out he's some kind of secret government genius?" "That's the short version," I said. Bev set down the coffee pot and looked at me with those steady brown eyes. "Darlene, the world is full of people who walk past need because they're afraid it'll cost them something. You walk toward it. That's not irrational. That's the most rational thing a person can do." I wrote that down later. I keep it on a note card taped to my cash register. 3 weeks after the SUVs left, Walter's back pay was restored to him. He tried to pay me for his stay. I refused. He tried again. I refused again. On his third attempt, he didn't offer cash. He handed me a check for the exact amount of my small business loan. $32,000. "I can't accept that," I said. "You can," he said. "Because it's not charity. It's a debt. You don't owe me anything, Walter." He looked at me the way he sometimes did, with those clear, pale eyes that had seen the inside of rooms most people don't know exist. "Darlene, you gave me back my dignity. That's worth more than I could ever repay. So let me at least pay off the part that has a number attached to it." I accepted. I won't pretend I didn't cry. My daughter Carla drove down the following weekend. Without Todd. She sat in the lobby and looked around at the motel like she was seeing it for the first time. The repaired roof. The new water heaters. The clean parking lot. The old man in room 9 who waved at her politely as he walked to the creek with his library book. "Mom," she said, "I'm sorry." "For what, specifically?" I wasn't being harsh. I genuinely wanted to know which part she'd thought about. For letting Todd talk about this place like it was just a number on a spreadsheet. It's not. Yours. It's Dad's. And I should have seen that. What about Todd? She was quiet for a moment. Todd and I are having some conversations. About a lot of things. I nodded. Good. Can I come visit more? I'd like that, I said. We can start with visits. Walter stayed through the winter. In the spring, his VA benefits kicked in fully, and he moved into a small apartment in Lexington that a veterans service organization helped him find. He calls me every Sunday at 7 in the morning without fail. We talk about the weather, about books, about nothing in particular. Sometimes about Roy. Sometimes about Helen. Last month he sent me a photograph in the mail. It was him and his son standing outside a restaurant in Arlington. Neither of them was smiling exactly, but they were standing close. That's something. That's a start. The motel is still here. The E in lodge is still missing from the sign, and I've decided I'm never fixing it. It gives the place character. Bookings picked up after a travel blogger stumbled onto us and wrote a piece called "The Most Honest Motel in Appalachia." I don't know what that means exactly, but it fills rooms and I'm not complaining. I still heat up soup for people who need it. I still keep that wool blanket on the lobby couch. If this story feels familiar to you, if you've ever been told that your kindness is irrational, that your compassion is a business liability, that caring about people is the same as being naive, I want you to hear something. Kindness is not weakness. Decency is not stupidity. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in this world is simply refuse to walk past someone who's shivering. You never know who they are. But more importantly, you never know who you become by stopping. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories like this one, and every single one of them started with someone who chose to do the quiet, right thing when it would have been easier not to. I'll see you in the next one.